Hey, Joe, obviously record keeping is really important in your line of work and what, somebody who...
It's paramount.
Yeah. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about that and the role that it plays and why it's so important.
Sure. You'd be amazed at how many times that I ask people about record keeping and they can't find those records. And they'll say, oh, well, that was a bill that was paid, so finance has it. For the government, that's not necessarily good enough. Yeah. It is good enough if you've worked with finance and you could pull those records. But understand, anything that causes an import or an export to happen, those records by law have to be kept for 5 years. And that's not only your entry documents on an import, but it could be your purchase order. It could be anything that caused that import to happen. It's 5 years. Now, problem that we have now is OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Controls, recently changed some of their laws where that record keeping is 10 years. Okay, now understand what that really means is if you have to keep those records for 10 years, that means you have open liability for those 10 years. Same with the import-exports. If it's a 5-year record keeping, it means that they can go back 5 years, and if they find an issue, then it's there. But the key to record keeping is creating a system where you can find those records when you need them. Do you have them at your site? Are they off-site? Have you created a process that says, I want to verify I can pull this record from 3 years ago and it's stored off-site? You have to be able to retrieve that record. When the government comes in and asks for those records, here, I want to see these records on these imports, they're going to give you a reasonable amount of time to find those records. You've got to be able to do that within that reasonable amount of time.
What is that reasonable amount of time typically?
And it varies, but typically they'll give you a week.
Okay.
And you can go back and say, hey, I need more time, and they'll typically grant it. But a lot of it depends upon the infraction and how many records they're looking for. If they're looking for 3 or 4 records, they expect you to retrieve them much easier. If you're looking for 100 records over a longer period, it's harder to retrieve.
And as Vigilant, do you help somebody come up with that process, or do you actually can you have all the records, or is it a combination of both?
Well, now the government allows electronic record keeping, so that's not a problem. You can keep those records electronically. You just have to test that system to make sure you can retrieve those when requested. Vigilant can help you monitor that and validate that those records are being kept and they can be retrieved.
Well, if somebody does have a question about, if they're wondering about their own, how would you start with them? I mean, do you just look at, you go in to give them a challenge and find this record? And then see how they do it, and then go, I can redesign the system? Or
well, we would do something very similar to that. Is we would come in and we would look at a list. We'd get it out of the ACE portal or from some other mechanism, their broker, of all the entries back 5 years, and then we would randomly pick several of those entries and say, produce these documents for these entries. We get called on quite a bit to do entry audits, and they'll give us the last 30 days. And that's great, and we can do that, but understand there's entries that are 3 years old. If they haven't been audited, that still poses a risk.
When you talk about 5, even 10 years out, that's crazy. But vigilantgts.com. If you're not there, go. There's more videos we have like this. And Joe, great talking to you as always.
Thank you.